Okay, so today I'd like to discuss what I consider to be perhaps the most pseudo-intellectual argument against veganism. And I'd like to give you not just one, not just two, not three, but four possible responses to give to someone who makes this ridiculous argument. And of course, I'm talking about when people say something to the effect of this: no ethical consumption under capitalism, and your vegan diet is not cruelty free. Okay, so here are the problems with making such a silly argument. Okay, objection number one. You see, in that picture, it says that your vegan diet is not cruelty free. And of course, that's true, right? Merely by existing in this world, you will inevitably cause some amount of suffering, some amount of cruelty, right? But the point of veganism was never that we will eradicate all forms of suffering from this world, because it's not possible to. The point of veganism was always that we should not cause intentional, unnecessary suffering. Like, consider this, right? When you order some meat or eggs or milk, right? The fact that there is some meat on your plate or some milk in your glass is indicative of the fact that there was some innocent animal who either was killed in the case of meat or was tortured in the case of milk, right? It is necessarily the case that that must have happened. There could not have been meat on your plate unless an innocent animal died, right? But when vegans, right, eat any plant-based food, when they buy any plant-based food, right, it might be the case that someone was harmed in the process of production of that food, but they're not paying for that harm to be caused, right? That's not what's being paid for. That's not what's being funded, right? But when you eat meat, you are indeed paying for someone to kill an innocent animal. There is a difference there. And to illustrate this point, let me give you an example. Imagine you're driving down a highway, right, or any road, right? Suddenly, out of nowhere, a dog comes in front of you. You do your best to kind of hit on the brakes, but you inevitably hit the dog and you kill the dog accidentally, right? That's scenario one. Now, consider a different scenario. You're driving down the road. You see a dog in the distance. You hit the gas, right? You hit the accelerator and you chase down the dog. The dog tries to escape. You keep chasing him until you run him over, right? The dog dies. Is there a difference between these two scenarios? Or is it just the same? Or is unintentionally hitting a dog and chasing down a dog until you're able to kill it? Are these two morally the same? No, of course not, right? So that doesn't work, right? To say that your vegan diet is not cruelty-free, that's missing the point, right? So even though you cannot be cruelty-free by going vegan, you can stop causing intentional, unnecessary suffering by going vegan. And I hope we can agree that the baseline of ethics, right, is to not cause intentional, unnecessary suffering, especially where it can be so easily avoided, right? So the point again is not about being cruelty-free. It is about causing less intentional, unnecessary suffering, right? And this point was kind of made brilliantly by a response to this tweet. I'll put it up on the screen now. Objection number two. Having addressed the text in the picture itself, let's address the text in the caption, right? So the caption says, there is no ethical consumption under capitalism. And I'm not even going to dissect that, right? For the purposes of this video, I'm just going to assume that it is true. I'm going to assume that it is the case that there is no ethical consumption under capitalism. It may be true, it may not be true. Doesn't matter. We'll assume that is true and we'll work with that, right? So the caption says there is no ethical consumption under capitalism. What does that mean? It means that for as long as the system of capitalism is in place, right, You cannot make any consumption choices which are completely ethical, right? That there needs to be a systemic change for us to be completely ethical. But how does that matter in this case? Does it mean that just because there is a need of a systemic change that you can do just whatever? Absolutely not. I'll give you an example. About 200 years ago, wait, not even 200 years ago, less than 100 years ago, right? India was a British colony, okay? And racism and xenophobia and hatred and violence, these were the reality of the colonial experience. Indians were enslaved, right? Indians were killed. Approximately 30 to 35 million Indians were killed during the colonial era. Okay, what was needed back then was a systemic change, a systemic overhaul, right? A systemic emancipation of India and all of other British colonies, right? Does that mean that you could just come to the colonies and harm any Indian that you'd like and say, oh, that's okay because what's needed is a systemic change? Of course not. That's not how this works, right? The fact that there needs to be a systemic change doesn't absolve you of the harm that you cause intentionally within the system, right? When you have the choice of not causing that intentional, unnecessary harm or suffering, right? Even if it is the case that there is no ethical consumption under capitalism, that doesn't absolve you of the harmful choices that you make under capitalism. Okay? Objection number 3. Now, before I present this objection to you, I'd like to make it absolutely clear that veganism is the mode of the non-human animal liberation movement, right? It is about the non-human animals. So, if you're still not convinced, right, about why you should care about non-human animal liberation, I previously made a video on that subject, and I'll link that somewhere around here, right? Be sure to watch that. It's a video I edited, right? It's the edited version, a shortened version, sort of a speech by Cosmic Skeptic. So make sure to watch that, right? Having made that clear, here's the objection, right? Even if you don't care, right, about non-human animal liberation, which you should, right? Even if you don't care about them, and even if you only care about human beings, right, and about the exploitation of human workers for the consumption, for your consumption, right? Even then, right, you're still obligated to be vegan, and here's why. Right? You see, the animals that you eat, right? They're tortured corpses, their secretions, their eggs, right? These animals need to be fed, right? They don't just appear out of thin air. They are living beings who need to be fed. So what are they fed? They are fed crops, right? They're fed soy and other kind of fodder crops, right? Now, how much food is required to like feed these animals? Just consider this before I even tell you the actual numbers, right? Human beings kill about 73 billion land animals every single year. That comes down to about 200 million animals, land animals, right? Every single day. Can you just imagine the amount of food that is required to feed these animals? To like grow them to a profitable size, sort of, right? And then slaughter them. It's immense. Okay. So here's just one statistic, right? And sources are, of course, always in the description box. To produce just 1 kilogram of beef, it takes 25 kilograms of grain. Imagine if instead of growing crops to feed the animals, right, and then eat the animals, to feed 73 billion animals every year to then eat those animals, if instead of doing that, what if we just grew crops to feed the 8 billion or so human beings that are currently alive. Surely, right, you can see that there needs to be lower amount of worker exploitation to produce food for 8 billion people than to produce for 73 billion land animals every single year, right? This should be obvious. So even if you just care about human beings, right, veganism is still the moral obligation. Objection number 4. You see, the entire point of this tweet, right, and the argument in general is that the people who make these arguments, right, claim to care about the exploitation of workers, right, who are involved in the production of food, right? But they conveniently forget that even the production of animal-based food requires workers, right? Requires manual labor. Now, it is the view of some people that even slaughterhouse workers are the victims of the animal agriculture industry. Now, I'm not going to delve into that for this video. Maybe that's a video for another day. But I am going to say this, right? For anyone who claims to care about the exploitation and about the working conditions of people involved in the production of food, you cannot just care about the workers involved in the production of one kind of food, right? And then completely forget about the workers who are involved in the production of another kind of food, right? If you care about workers, you care about workers, right? And slaughterhouse workers, whether or not you consider them victims, it is a fact, right, that they suffer from a form of PTSD because they're exposed to bloodshed and torture and death every single day, or at least multiple times a week. And that just remains true whether or not you consider slaughterhouse workers to be a victim of the animal agriculture industry. It just remains true, right? It's a fact, right? And this specific form of PTSD that slaughterhouse workers go through, right, or the specific form that they suffer from is called PITS, PITS, and it stands for perpetrator-induced traumatic stress, which is the kind of PTSD which stands for post-traumatic stress disorder, right? So this simply cannot be an excuse against going vegan, right? Because the exploitation of workers unfortunately exists in the production of any kind of food, right? You are causing suffering to workers irrespective of what you choose to eat. The only difference, the only meaningful difference, is that plants cannot suffer while the non-human animals that you eat, right, can suffer, just like human beings. So that's the only meaningful difference, right? So when you consume meat, right, you are causing unnecessary suffering that you could have so easily avoided, right? So this simply cannot be an excuse against going vegan. Now, before I end this video, I'd like to share one final thought, and it's not an objection to the original argument that I was addressing, right? I think I've done more than a sufficient job at rebuking that. It's an observation about the argument itself. You see, when people make this argument, what they're essentially doing, right, is they're using someone else's suffering for their own greed of consuming non-human animal-based food products. I think that's morally abhorrent, right? So not only is this argument flawed, right, as I've demonstrated sufficiently within this video, it is also immoral, right? Don't do it. I've been Aditya Prakash, or Soy Theist. Make sure to follow me on social media, especially on Instagram, where I share my more candid thoughts. I'd also like to thank my wonderful patrons on Patreon who make these videos possible. They also voted for the topic of this video, right? It is because of their votes that I made the video on this subject. So if you do love the content, please consider supporting me on Patreon at soy theist. As always, thank you kindly for the view. Make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave your thoughts in the comments. We can have some wonderful discussions there. And I'll see you in the next video.